Fantastic. We are now 23 attendees and the live stream and everything has been set up. So I invite the panel to start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome. This morning's panel on dehumanization and polarization and Hindutva hate speech features a couple of speakers who have actually studied hate speech in Rwanda, have seen it happen in Rwanda. And in fact, Greg Gordon was the prosecutor in the media trial at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda that prosecuted the hate speech. He will be our first speaker this morning, and we will also have a talk by Jean Damascene Gasanabo, an old friend from Rwanda. We have had many a meal together at the Heaven Restaurant in the heart of Kigali. And John Damascene and I have really talked about how we can overcome this kind of hate speech in Rwanda. We also have two experts really on hate speech in India today. We have Manavi Atri, who is a specialist in this in India, and we also have Meetali Jain. So between these folks, we are going to discover just how hate speech works and also what can be done to counter it. I first am going to call on Greg Gordon, who has written probably, I think, the best book on atrocity speech ever written. Greg teaches at the University of Hong Kong. He is a dean there, in fact, and he has, as I said, prosecuted the media case in the ICTR. He's well known around the world, and I can tell you, well known among genocide scholars. It is such a pleasure because he's also a very good friend. Greg, would you tell us about hate speech and how it can be countered?
I will, and I thank you for that really warm and kind introduction. This is meaningful for me on many levels, and I am aware of how horrible the problem is right now in India, and I really appreciate the work that you've been doing, Greg, and you know, we need you, like I said earlier, and you're here for us, so it's great. I'm glad that I can help tonight. What I'd like to do is set the stage to some extent, which I hope will be a good framework for discussion for all of us. I do have a very brief PowerPoint. I'm going to put it on, and hopefully I've got the sharing privilege. I teach now almost exclusively on Zoom, so I'm quite used to this. I'm going to start up here, and I've got our panel and my topic: recognizing, outlawing, and countering hate speech. So what I want to start with is the spectrum. So when we talk about hate speech, in my book, as Greg kindly introduced, Atrocity Speech Law, Foundation, Fragmentation, Fruition, I lay out a spectrum of hate speech, which I think should be helpful for us today as we try to consider what kinds of hate speech to recognize in the Indian context. So on the far left of the spectrum, we have general hate speech, and then we have harassment, and then incitement. And my view is that these involve, from left to right, less serious to the most serious types of hate speech. General hate speech, statements attacking outgroup, creating general climate more receptive to animosity and violence. I give some examples. The Tutsis are rapists. The Jews have stolen all our money. Harassment, statements attacking the outgroup directly. Examples: you do not belong here, you are vermin. And then incitement, statements calling for action. And then I distinguish between incitement to hatred, incitement to persecution, incitement to violence. With explicit, kill them; non-explicit, go to work, which is kind of the coded type of language that we hear often in these contexts. And I'm going to be very curious to hear how that's worked with the horrible anti-Muslim hate speech that's been going on in India, and I'm sure we're going to hear about that more today. But what I'd like to do now is look at, so that last category is incitement. I'd now like to look at the different kinds of incitement. So when we get to that most serious part, what we're talking about are a number of different categories that I point out in my book. So direct calls for destruction, and I believe we've had calls for the extermination of Muslims. It's been as bad as that in India recently. Predictions of destruction. So often what insiders will do is they will talk about how it will be glorious to rid the country of the outgroup. Verminization, pathologization, and demonization is a big one for today's topic because this is one of the most common techniques that's used. Verminization and pathologization often have to do with vilifying people through animal metaphors, metaphors of disease. You know, in the Rwandan genocide, Tutsis were referred to as Inyenzi or cockroaches. The Jews were referred to as bacteria or disease in Nazi Germany. And then of course demonization is often used as well. I think it speaks for itself. Accusation in a mirror is a classic. That's where the inciter is essentially accusing the victim of what the inciter actually wants. So it kind of turns it on its head. Euphemisms and metaphors, of course, go to work. I just gave you an example of that, which was code during the Rwandan genocide for kill Tutsis. Justifications during contemporary violence, talking about how violence is good, how the fight is righteous, those sorts of things. Condoning or congratulating past violence, similar, we see that often in the Rwandan genocide through the RTLM broadcasts, where they are talking about how they're doing good work and how it's making Rwanda better. Asking questions, when will we be rid of these vermin? When will we be rid of these demons, etc.? And then conditional calls for destruction. If they do this, then we will take care of them. We will take them out. Those sorts of calls are equally incitement, as I point out in my book. Now, what do we do with that? Now, this is something that I actually developed with Greg and Jean Damascene in Rwanda. We had a conference a few years ago, and from that came out with a piece called Speech Along the Atrocity Spectrum. And so I posit that there's a chronology of atrocity that we can look at. I link it to Greg's 10 stages of genocide. So I have scholarship on this. Please take a look at it. Speech Along the Atrocity Spectrum is the name of my article. It's in the Georgia Journal of International Law. But I posit that there's a pre-process phase where, speech is not as ramped up as it's going to be, and where there's still a chance to counter it with good speech, a twilight zone, and then what I call the process phase, where, and these are sort of tracking, and I don't have the time because I've got a short presentation today, but these are essentially tracking various stages that Greg has laid out in his great framework. But I propose that legal action is necessary when we reach this process phase. And that's where we're talking more about incitement as opposed to either harassment or general hate speech. And we can see specifically that there's salutary speech, neutral speech, and inimical speech. And the inimical speech generally tracks the categories I looked at in my first slide. But what happens is when we combine these, then we can see that the efficacy of salutary speech, where we can counter bad speech with good speech, is most potent during the pre-process phase. It's not quite as clear if it's as effective during the twilight zone, and it's during the twilight zone that we have to be very vigilant, and I would say trying to protect free speech as best we can, but also be very leery of the fact that we could be dealing with atrocities. And once we're sort of toward the right side of the spectrum on the twilight zone, we should start looking at legal action. So what kind of legal action am I talking about? Well, I want to look at the offenses that are available under current law. And these are some of the main cases that we see where these offenses have been fleshed out. So incitement, direct incitement to commit genocide. We see that in the Nahimana case, the media case that Greg mentioned that I worked on as well as Akayesu, the first genocide conviction since the Genocide Convention, and the first big trial at the ICTR. We can see the elements: direct, public, incitement, mens rea, which is 2 layers, and causation. Not clear according to some experts, but I will argue that causation is not part of the calculus. Persecution as a crime against humanity, hate speech as persecution. It's part of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population with knowledge of the attack, a severe fundamental group rights deprivation, which the hate speech I submit should qualify for, motivated by group status, and same gravity level as the other crimes against humanity acts, such as everything from deportation to imprisonment to rape and murder. Instigation, prompting another to commit an offense, resulting in the commission of the offense, intent that the offense be committed, connection between prompting and the crime. There must be a contribution, a substantial contribution that is made. And then ordering, transmitting an unlawful command by a superior to a subordinate, awareness of the substantial likelihood of the crime's commission, and then the crime is actually committed. Now, in my book, which I really appreciated I did bring a copy, just in case I wanted to take a look. I offer a way to fill in some of the gaps that we see here. So this is a kind of a complicated chart in some ways, but it's my unified liability for atrocity speech law. And the bottom line is that we can look at speech that before atrocity takes place, catalytic and non-catalytic is causal versus non-causal, and then we can see instigation, ordering, incitement, and ordering. I propose speech abetting as a new offense, which will allow for prosecution of speech during the commission of atrocities, which I call egging on speech. And then what's really important is you may have noticed that, for example, incitement is only there for genocide. Under my theory, we should expand it to the other crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and then possibly aggression, which is very appropriate given what's going on in Ukraine right now. But these core crimes link up with these speech categories, and under my theory, we have a complete enforcement package. That is what I suggest we need to do, we should go toward. I hope that we develop these kinds of laws so that we can help the victims in India. And I hope that I've given you a framework on which and about which we can discuss further in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. I think the power of your model is one that is going to be more and more used as we think about atrocity crimes and about incitement. Thank you very much. I want to now call upon Jean-Damascene Gasanabo, who is the Director General of the National Research and Documentation Center on Genocide at Rwanda's National Commission for the Fight Against Genocide. His research focuses on the construction of exclusive identities in Rwanda from 1962 to 1994. He has a PhD in education from the University of Geneva, Switzerland. He's worked with UNESCO at the headquarters in Paris, and he was head of support at an organization called Geneva Call, which is dedicated to engaging armed groups to end the use of anti-personnel mines. Thank you very much for being with us this morning, Jean-Damascene. I will hand the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I would like to make something clear here. I'm no longer working for the CNRG, the National Commission for the Fight Against Genocide. CNRG doesn't exist anymore, so I'm not working for that institution, and I'm not working for any government institution for now, so I'm not representing any official institution. I'm here as an independent researcher. That was what Greg said, that was before until October 2021. So for now, I'm not representing any official institution. So I want this to be clear. So allow me to talk about incitement before the independence of Rwanda, which was obtained in 1962, before the genocide of 1994, and during the genocide of 1994, genocide against the Tutsi. In 1957, 9 Hutu intellectuals published what they called the Hutu Manifesto. Through the title, it's easy to understand the ethnic connotation as well as the design of the authors to exclude the 2 other social groups, Tutsi and Twa. This document was supported by influential Catholic priests. In the same year of 1957, the political party Parmehutu, Party of the Movement for the Emancipation of the Hutu, was created by Mr. Gregory Kayibanda, who will become the first president when Rwanda became independent in 1962. Here also, Parmehutu and the Hutu Manifesto. Here we also see the ethnic orientation of the political party. In September 59, another intellectual, Joseph Habyarimana Gitera, wrote and published what he called the 10 Commandments of the Hutu, September 1959. These 10 Commandments reinforce the ideology of hatred between groups. Gitera used hateful language starting that, I'm quoting, "A relationship between the Tutsi and the Hutu is impossible. A relationship between a Hutu and the Tutsi is like a chronic wound on the leg, or leash in the body, or a pneumonia in the ribs." End of quote. Gitera used his 2 newspapers. One was called Jambere. In English, you can say, take another step. And another one called Ijwi rya Rubanda Rugufi, or the voice of people, to publish and propagandize his 10 Commandments. These commandments were the basis of the mass mobilization for hatred against the Tutsi. What began as an ideology of hatred resulted in exclusion of Tutsi from the country in 1959. For the first time, Tutsi left in the country in 1959 and became refugees in neighboring countries such as Burundi, Congo, Tanzania, Uganda, even Kenya. So 59, this is the beginning of killing of the Tutsi. And then the killing continued in 60, 61, 62 until 66 and 73. And then during the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. In 1990, the Kangura newspaper was created, an extremist newspaper that republished the Hutu 10 Commandments in November 1990. The Hutu 10 Commandments initially published by Gitera in 1959. So a new example of the use of media to propagandize hatred against the Tutsi. I think Greg Gordon also in his publications mentioned the role of media in the genocide against the Tutsi. The republication of the 10 Commandments of the Hutu was the start of clear actions of planning the genocide, since killings followed in particular in the region of Byumba, Gisenyi, Ruhengeri, Bugesera, and Bogo. In January 1992, we saw the creation of the Interahamwe newspaper. Interahamwe, we know Interahamwe is the name of the militia group, but also Interahamwe was the name of their newspaper. In January 1992, the newspaper Interahamwe was created, which was affiliated with the MRND, the Mouvement Républicain National pour le Développement, one of the political party of the President Habyarimana. And the leader of this newspaper was known as Robert Kajuga, a leader of Interahamwe militia at the national level. This newspaper, together with others such as Kangura, Kamarampaka, La Médaille Nyiramakshiviri, Echo de Mircolin, Umurwanashaka, RTLM was among the media that funded hate propaganda and the incitement of the Hutu population to commit genocide. In February 1992, the so-called Coalition pour la Défense de la République, a new political party, very extremist political party, was formed, which played a major role in the genocide campaign, both in its preparation and the mobilization of the Hutu to unite and kill the Tutsi. The party was formed by a group of Hutu extremist intellectuals from Gisenyi and Ruhengeri prefecture in the north of the country, who were working in various government institutions and were united by their hatred for the Tutsi. On July 8, 1993, we saw the creation of the RTLM, the creation of the Radio Télévision Libre de Mircolin, which was broadcasting hate speech, political messages, and even songs that called for the extermination of the Tutsi, and that the political speeches and political slogans were transformed into songs, and extremist Hutu, especially the youth, were mobilized to execute the genocide. In January 1994, there was a meeting, very high-level meeting at Rebero, organized by the Hutu political party, extremist political party, MRND, CEDER, MDR, PSD, PS, and PER. And among those political parties, the members, they were very extremist Hutus who called for the killing of the Tutsi. That was January 1994. And in that meeting, they created the Hutu power. What they called the Hutu power. Power is from the power. It means the Hutu, they have the power, all powers. And this political party called political party extremist Hutu power were created in January 1994. And in that meeting also, it was decided to distribute arms to the population. On January 27, 1994, RTLM aired a number of talk shows full of hatred, calling all the Hutu to unite and fight, I'm quoting, fight until the last, end of the quote, fight until the last, killing all Tutsi, so no one should survive. Arguing that the Belgian soldiers within the United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda, UNAMIR, had the plan to offer the country to the Tutsi. These talk shows followed a meeting that brought together top leaders of MRND, including its Secretary General, Joseph Zirorera, the Vice President, Edouard Karemera, etc., including also Robert Kajuga, the head of Interahamwe at the national level, and other political leaders. Orders were issued saying that Interahamwe would no longer respect the orders given by the Belgian soldiers within UNAMIR, and instead would be ready to oppose them and do their best to incite the population to hate them. The objective pursuit was that of inciting the withdrawal of UNAMIR in order to be able to easily commit genocide without the presence of a foreign force capable of militarily confronting the Rwandan armed forces and of preventing the genocide against the Tutsi. On February 25, 1994, the leadership of Interahamwe held an important meeting headed by Robert Kajuga. The meeting used all the Interahamwe to keep all Tutsi under close observation, especially those who had been already put on lists to be murdered. They were put on standby, ready to use the distributed firearms and other weapons. They were reminded to work closely with Impuzamugambi, the extremist movement, especially young people from CDR, and all the political parties which shared or were supportive of the extremist Hutu power ideology. This union of forces joined that of the small parties allied to the MRND and PECO, many political parties coming together with MDR and Hutu power to kill, to make the preparation of the genocide. On the same date, 25th of February, 1994, the Association of Peace Volunteers, or Rwandan Human Rights Organization, issued a statement in which it denounced the existence of plan for massacres and the hate speech broadcasts on the extremist RTLM radio. They published a list of the victims of the state-orchestrated murders, especially around Kigali, and sent an urgent appeal to UNAMIR to bring to an end the state-sponsored murders. On February 27, 1994, leaders of Interahamwe as well as other senior MDR officials, including Michel Bagaragaza, Joseph Nzirorera, Augustin Girabatware, etc., and even Serafin Rwabukumba, the brother of President Habyarimana, met at Rebero, at this hide in Rebero, again to see how they can bring money, put money together, put funds together to finance Interahamwe and the killing of the Tutsi. On March 1st, 1994, preparation of intensification of the genocide. The report from foreign embassies in Rwanda in 1994 showed that the month of March 1994 saw increased incitement to genocide. In a telex sent the 1st of March 1994, the Belgian ambassador to Rwanda, Johan Swinen, informed the Belgian authorities of broadcasts on the extremist radio television Libre de Mille Collines, RTLM, which were, I'm quoting, inflammatory statements calling for hatred, even the extermination of the other part of the population, end of the quotation. On April 19th, this is after the beginning of the genocide. The genocide against the Tutsi started officially on the 7th of April, 1994, and few days later, on April 19th, we have here now the hate speech by the president, Sindikubwabo Theodore, in Butare. The president of the criminal government, Theodore Sindikubwabo, called on people of Butare to exterminate Tutsi. In his speech, he called on the public to actively participate in the killings. Later, soldiers joined by the Hutu Interahamwe militia killed many Tutsi civilians living in Butare and refugees from other parts of the country. Among those who participated in the inauguration ceremony of the new prefect included members of the criminal government who shared the same ideology of extermination of the Tutsi. We have Mugenzi Justin, Prosper Mugiraneza, Pauline Nyinamasuhuko, and of course the president Sindikubwabo. So briefly, I wanted to give you a brief summary of incitement during the colonial period, end of the colonial period, just before the independence, between 1990 and 1994, and just during the genocide, to show you how the genocide was prepared even many, many years before, and how the government, members of the government of Rwanda, participated in inciting the population to kill. So Greg, this is the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions if there are any. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jean Damascene. I will now call on our experts on this from India. First, Meetali Jain, who is the Deputy Director of Reset. It is an initiative engaged in how to use technology for democracy. She is a lawyer, she's an academic, she's a campaigner, both in the US and in South Africa. She began her legal career representing individuals charged with terrorism, and she has then focused on holding corporations accountable for human rights abuses. And she facilitated the development of the African Coalition on Corporate Accountability. Most recently, she serves as the legal and campaign director at Avaaz, where she has worked to safeguard human rights. And I'm very, very honored to be able to have her talk, and she will bring this discussion directly to bear on the hate speech in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Stanton, and thank you to the organizers of this conference for inviting me to this panel. I'll keep my remarks brief because I know that time is of the essence. As Professor Stanton outlined, my background is as a human rights attorney. I came to this issue very much with that lens, from a lens of human rights and what was happening by way of hate speech and disinformation, and quite concerned that there was a dearth of regulatory frameworks, that there was a dearth of enforcement against something that had such profound impacts translating from what was happening online to offline. And so my earliest foray into this was really to delve into a deep research project when I was at the global campaigning organization Avaaz. We published a report about incendiary hate speech and misinformation of a genocidal character, very much akin to what we saw in Myanmar and what we've seen since in Ethiopia. Calling, for example, on Hindu fathers to kill their daughters for fear of them being corrupted by Muslim men, calling for open calls to genocide and extermination of Muslim areas, primarily Bengali Muslim areas in the northeastern state of Assam. And this was in the run-up to the citizenship registration process, otherwise known as the NRC, the National Registration of Citizens, where Assam was undergoing a process by which to determine who was an Indian citizen and who was not. And so because of the very nature of that, it kind of perpetuated the existing structural fault lines in society. And we started to see a lot of this hate speech and disinformation online. The report we issued, we documented and flagged hundreds of posts with millions of views to Facebook. The report was focused on Facebook, but Facebook's actions were slow and underwhelming. And the report came out just in October of 2020, just before the mass protests in India. Sorry, it was 2019, just before the mass protests in India against a law that was adopted that codified Islamophobia and which continued and culminated in the pogroms in Delhi that killed many people, most of whom were Muslim. I will just focus my remaining remarks on the role of social media companies in aggravating the problem of hate speech online. I want to make 4 brief points. One is that there is a corporate failure to understand the elaborate frameworks of speech that, for example, Professor Gordon laid out, that others have laid out, Susan Benesch, dangerous speech. We in our report very much tried to advocate for a nuanced understanding of hate speech that really took into account the kind of speech that may not technically qualify as hate speech, but which nevertheless incites people to feelings of wanting to do harm offline. And there was just simply a failure on the part of the social media companies to really grapple with those frameworks and to understand them. And what we saw time and time again were cookie cutter definitions of speech that were not consistent with the realities that we were seeing online. And so that, I think, is something that's further accentuated by the lack of regulatory frameworks that social media companies are held to account for. And that's a problem of regulation, which I think is starting to be addressed, certainly by the European Union, but I think we definitely need to see much more sophisticated action there. And also just having more experts on staff who really understand these frameworks and understand these realities in ways that are going to be beneficial to enforcement. Number two, I would just like to say that, you can't talk about hate speech in a country like India or Rwanda or anywhere without really grappling with both the role of online social media companies and traditional media companies. And I think from that perspective in India, the traditional media landscape is completely captured by the state, well, almost completely. And so it's very important to be thinking about approaches that really grapple with the utterance of hate speech, both in traditional media and in social media. Third, I think it's very important to speak about the inequity of enforcement of policy. So if we're focused on social media companies for a moment, I would just say that there is one set of rules that operates for the global north, and there is another set of rules that operates for the global south. And so while, for example, we saw that Facebook removed a US sitting president in the last presidential term whose words were used to inspire people to violence. And while thankfully we are starting to see social media companies demonetize Russian state media actors in this war with Ukraine, we still have not seen Facebook take meaningful action in terms of deplatforming or limiting the words of some of the most egregious propagators of this hate speech in Indian Hindu priests, politicians, etc. And so there is an inequity in the rules and how they are enforced against actors in different states, and which really matter, I think, to these companies. And the final thing I'll say is just about the role of free speech and censorship. There is a red herring. I think a lot of people tend to shift away from wanting to enforce hate speech as aggressively as it should be enforced because of a notion of free speech that really is in some ways outdated, because what we see is really the limitations of what free speech should be. Where there is incitement to violence, where there is inspiration to violence, that speech can and should be limited in ways that would cut off the ability of these actors to inspire any other individuals to violence. But often we're seeing objections put up by in the name of free speech. And so that's just more of a jurisprudential or rhetorical point that I really think that I would love to see more people grapple with. And let me leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meetali. I want to especially ask later, after we've heard from Manavi Atri, if India has laws that immunize organizations like Facebook, corporations, from lawsuits, lawsuits for damages. And as you know, that's one of the things that some of us are hoping we can bring about in around the world, actually. I'm now going to introduce Manavi Atri, who is a human rights lawyer working with the Campaign Against Hate Speech in the field of media accountability and understanding Hindutva violence in Karnataka. I have a special interest in her remarks because I lived in Karnataka and loved living in Karnataka. And I got to know the Minister of Justice there, Justice Havanur, who kind of adopted me and started taking me around the state with him in the back of his ambassador car and, staying in government rest houses. And honestly, the time I spent in Karnataka was just one of the happiest in my whole life. So we were there, and now, of course, here we have a situation where hate speech has permeated even Karnataka. So Manavi, please explain to us what your perspectives.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that introduction. And like you rightly pointed out, the hate speech has reached Karnataka in ways that it's now being called the Hindutva lab of the south of India. And in the course of the work of Campaign Against Hate Speech, our major engagements have been with the role of media and what that role means in the implementation, in the 10 stages of the genocide, which is your theory. And in the course of the next few minutes, what I hope to do is give a context, an actual context of ground reality from Karnataka, for which I'd like to share my screen. Just one second. Yes. We basically started our work in Karnataka to look at combating against hate speech 2 years ago, where we looked at the coverage of the Tablighi Jamaat and the CA dissenters in 2019 and 2020. And what we found was that it is particularly egregious in the way it covered the Muslim minority. And I'll go in a bit in detail and to give you examples, but I wanted to start off with a more contemporary example of this week. This is basically a genocidal call that was given by a Bajrang Dal leader in Vijaypura in context of the hijab row that had stemmed from Karnataka. And as you can see, the words that she uses are, but if you want to bring hijab, if you want NRIs to bring hijab in India, then we'll take Chhatrapati Shivaji's sword and butcher you inch by inch. And she's clearly referring to Muslims over here. And I also want to critically point out that this happened 3 days ago, and there has been no state action taken, despite this coming to the knowledge of the state. And I also want to leave over here the fact that the Indian law in and of itself, as most people here would know, especially you, since you have been in Karnataka, Indian law does not outlaw genocide as per criminal law. While our constitution specifically says that the right to life ensures right to life equally to all persons, it does not create criminal sanction for people for such kind of genocidal calls. The second example that I want to take you all through is the pandemic of hate speech. At a time when the entire world was reeling under the lockdowns and under the pandemic, coronavirus pandemic, India was reeling under another pandemic, which was the pandemic of hate speech, where we saw an entire community, the Muslim community, demonized for taking the blame of spreading coronavirus to the entirety of country for a congregation in Delhi. We saw terminologies such as Tablighi virus, Corona jihad, Corona criminals, venom, Tablighi virus being thrown around loosely in traditional media as well as social media, so much so that we saw real life consequences for the Muslims through ways of economic and social boycotts, in ways in which that they were assaulted publicly for being Muslim because of this narrative that they were an entire community to carry the blame for the coronavirus pandemic in India. The third particular reportage I want to take you all through is also to the same time of the Tablighi Jamaat coverage, which is of weekly called Star of Mysore. This particular coverage draws a parallel between bad apples in a basket and between Muslims and India. And it says that the only way, and I can point you all to the bottom of the slide over here, that the ideal solution to the problem created by bad apples is to get rid of them. And this is in the context of the final solution, as you all have all being experts know in terms of the Nazi Germany. So you see that this is an open genocidal call that was made in a newspaper, which was responded to by Star of Mysore with an underwhelming conditional apology, but we saw no criminal action take place. And even though regulatory action, as per the Press Council of India Act, has not moved in the last 2 years. I want to leave you all with this last line in terms of my examples to then discuss what this impact has been in Karnataka, is that the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but those who watch them passively without doing anything. This is the aspect of inciting hatred in Hindus and consolidating them and their opinions to actually carry forward this genocide that this newspaper called for. Now I'll stop with the examples, and I wanted to, based in this context of these examples, I want to talk about the impact what this has led to in Karnataka. We saw multiple instances, as I mentioned, of economic and social boycott. We saw assaults happening in terms of street vendors who were Muslim, because there was fake videos and disinformation, as Meetali pointed out at that point of time, that Muslim community was spitting to spread coronavirus in India. And this particular economic and social boycott also comes in the context that Karnataka has a region called Dakshin Kannada. Dakshin Kannada is specifically known historically for being the hotbed for hate speech. And over the years, Dakshin Kannada has reached a stage of surviving through so much hate speech that today there is a veritable breakdown of fraternal relations between communities there. And if this kind of hate speech and this kind of dehumanization and demonization of the Muslim community continues, we are sure to see similar patterns emerge all throughout Karnataka. Now, we've pointed out about the problems, spoken enough about it in terms of India and Karnataka, but something that we've been doing from the campaign is that we really believe that we have to activate accountability mechanisms and institutions to make sure that the media, the traditional media, especially, as well as elected representatives, are held accountable for their hate speech. And to that end, especially for the Tablighi Jamaat coverage, we also approached the self-regulatory body called the News Broadcasting Digital Standards Authority, and for 3 particular coverages. For all 3 of them, sanctions were ordered, especially for News 18 Kannada, where they were ordered to issue an apology, an unconditional apology, as well as pay a fine of 1 lakh rupees. And this was basically a public view apology to acknowledge their role in inciting hatred against a religious minority community. I also want to note that at this point in the particular order also notes that this order might not be able to repair the damage already done, will not be able to remedy this damage that has been done in the name of reportage in India. And this is the kind of hate speech that we're seeing in traditional media today in Karnataka. I also want to talk about why we think it is important for campaigns and networks like this in India to emerge at this point. We really believe that now is the stage where individual responses will not be able to handle the situation. We really believe that collective response from the ground in a manner in which you're able to track hate speech, comprehensively respond to each instance, which leads to documentation through the law, which leads to complaints being filed, which leads to memorandums, representations, multiple institutions from the state, whether it be your human rights commissions, whether it be your state minorities commissions, your police stations, your government, all of them are constantly activated in a sense with a responsibility. If they fail, the failure is documented. If they succeed, that success will aid in preventing this genocide, which we're on the brink of. So keeping that in mind, we really believe that resistance and documentation, regardless of the stage of genocide we are in India, is especially key to resist this and ensure that we're able to bring back our democracy to life. I will pause there and really look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish we had more time because we do need to end, I'm afraid, in just a couple minutes. I wanted to see if any of you had particular comments on how India can particularly go after those who are using hate speech. As I understand it, there are laws under which India can, in fact, prosecute people who purvey hate speech. I'm particularly, of course, interested in Facebook, and I wonder if you have laws that would allow us to, in fact, bring a lawsuit against Facebook. I think they owe us billions of dollars for what they've done. Anyway, a brief comment, maybe, if each of you has a comment, and then we'll have to close it.
I am going to defer to Manavi as the Indian trained lawyer first to go, and then I'll just add to it.
So, Professor, we do have hate speech laws under the Indian Penal Code. We do have laws, 153, Section 153A, which specifically talks about promoting enmity between religious communities, the punishment for which is of 7 years. It's a non-bailable, cognizable offense. But we also see that we struggle to get complaints turned into FIRs, which is basically the first step for initiating criminal procedure in India. So there is definitely hate speech laws that exist in India, how much ever high their threshold may be, how much ever our principal struggles with them may be. But we really struggle actually, in fact, to activate them because of the state complicity in refusing to take action against hate speech in India.
Thank you. I think that actually sums up the answer to my question. So I'm afraid we're going to have to close now because we do have to prepare for the next panel in which Adama Dieng is going to be speaking. I want to thank all of you for this very interesting discussion today. We started with a really very broad and a comprehensive understanding with Professor Gordon. We had a specific examination of the Rwandan case of hate speech. And now Meetali Jain and Manavi Atri have brought this home to India and how we might, in fact, address hate speech in India and how we might in fact prosecute those who put forward the hate speech. So thank you to all of you. Appreciate your help.
Thank you for putting it together.
Thank you so much.